Welcome back into the Play-by-Play, a sports media talk show from Awful Announcing, where we proudly accept the name that Damian Woody has given to Micah Parsons, as well as us. We are podcast boys. Welcome back. I'm Brendon Kleen, a staff writer at Awful Announcing. That over there is Ben Axelrod, a senior editor at Awful Announcing. Big show in store. Chris Vannini of The Athletic joining to break down his college football TV survey and the wild world of college football this year, this season, which has been awesome ahead of a newly revamped college football playoff. But before we get there, Ben, Drew Brees, a name I didn't think, if you had asked me last week, what are we going to be talking about? I don't even think Drew Brees would have been on my radar. But as Scott Van Pelt said, to welcome him to Monday Night Countdown, they were in California. They made a carefully placed call, and Drew Brees, I think, obviously accepts that when ESPN gives it to him. What did you make of Brees returning to the scene and his debut on ESPN airwaves as part of the pregame show for Monday Night Football?
Definitely interesting. I kind of always figured Drew Brees' brief foray into sports media would be kind of a cautionary tale about how it's not as easy as everybody thinks, how it's not, something you retire one day and you wake up the next day and you're a broadcaster. There's actually a process. We saw Tom Brady take a year off after his retirement before getting in the Fox booth. We saw Greg Olson work his way up and, call XFL games before ultimately becoming Fox's top broadcaster. And it looked like Drew Brees was going to be one and done. And based on the reaction he got and the negative reviews, I don't think anybody would have blamed him, but it seems like he's done with the NBC family and he's kind of migrating over toward the ESPN family. And, obviously if there's anywhere where he could work out, I would think it would be ESPN, just because they do have so many roles that he could fill. I think that they're pretty smart about the positions that they put their talent in. And I think last night was kind of a soft launch of maybe Drew Brees' time at ESPN.
For sure. They have a much wider array. He did participate, obviously called that infamous Bengals-Raiders playoff game for NBC back in 2022. Never really got another shot calling a big game for the network, but was on the Football Night in America show here and there, and just eventually it petered out. He starts a YouTube channel. I went back and looked at that. He put like 10 videos on, and he's been consistent, though, regardless of all of that he wanted back in. And Andrew Marchand of The Athletic reports that this could be the start of something bigger with ESPN. I mean, it sounds like they had been eyeing him maybe even before that opportunity with NBC came along, and NBC just kind of beat them to the punch. Now they're getting their shot. But you mentioned that he could be, the versatility, the array of options for him at ESPN is maybe a good thing. I actually, watching him on the show, it's not that I think he was bad. I thought he was more than capable. He honestly was getting in and out and was very succinct and kind of keeping it moving in a way that I think is rare for guys, but maybe that Football Night in America experience helped. I think he almost has to be in a booth. Like, to me, calling a game, I know that sounds crazy if you watched that Bengals-Raiders game, because he was not well received. It did not work. He had a little bit of the Brady syndrome of just not really feeling the moment and feeling the energy of the game correctly. But it just feels like that's what his analysis is tailor-made for. He can take you into the mind of a quarterback. He wants to be in the weeds. He wants to be deep in a play, in a playbook, in a progression of this open this up, that open that up, this quarterback's thinking that. Like, it's not that it doesn't work, but when I'm watching, Ryan Clark and Jason Kelly and Swagoo chopping it up, having fun, Scott Van Pelt playing point, they're doing a different thing than Drew Brees is doing. And so he was good, but I think he's got to be in a booth.
I wonder if that's a matter of who he was paired with, because as you go through those names, he doesn't fit. But I could see him in a CBS NFL Today type of role, kind of like Matt Ryan's playing right now. But I do think you're right, ultimately, that because of his name and because of his credentials, I think he probably should be in a booth. It's just a question of, is he ready for it? Like, can you throw him back in a premium position? Because I don't know if he's the guy who's going to work his way up. I think if you have Drew Brees calling games, like they have to be pretty, primetime spotlight games. I wonder, just as we talk this out, like if these, because we're getting all these holiday games coming up, and I know the booths are set for Netflix, but if just this proliferation that we're starting to see, and I'm not even talking about necessarily this season, but moving forward, like if you could get him in one of those Netflix booths, or if you could get him on an ESPN Plus exclusive overseas game, like maybe that's a way where you can put him in a position where it feels like he's in a top broadcast booth without actually having to put him on Monday Night Football. And the other part of that equation would be there aren't any openings, right? That the with Chris Collinsworth re-signing at NBC and Troy Aikman set at ESPN and Tom Brady set at Fox and Tony Romo at CBS, like all the top jobs are taken right now.
It's fair. It's fair. I don't necessarily think that there is a job for him. Maybe this is just something where he does this show. Maybe next year they bring him on in more of a full-time capacity. And then it's like the year after that, we finally really start talking about him. And the media landscape looks different. Maybe Netflix has bought a few more games over the course of a season, or, whatever the case might be. We're already looking toward the next TV package at that point or something. But again, it's not a bad thing. The thing I wondered though is because I wanted to read this quote from him. He said I believe it was Front Office Sports was where this one. He's given versions of this quote all over the place in the couple of years since he left ESPN. He said, or left NBC. He said, "I didn't really get the chance to broadcast NFL games, and that's what I feel like I'm most qualified to do. That's what I feel like I'm most passionate about. It's certainly where my knowledge base lies. Telling the story of the game, getting you inside the huddle, inside the quarterback's head, letting you know how we're attacking this defense. That, to me, is something I'd love to do down the road when the time is right." He kind of reminds me of Peyton Manning in his approach. Yes. Like, he kind of like, I mean this in a complimentary way, but he's sort of, he 3-step or 5-step drops his way into every answer. Where, like, if you listen to Peyton enough these days, even on the Manning cast or in interviews, you kind of have the script of how he's going to get himself into his talking points in your head if you've heard it enough times. And I haven't heard it enough times with Drew Brees, but the polish is there where I feel like he can do better than he did in that last one. And I wonder if he can, would he call college games? Would he step into the Robert Griffin role that he just got laid off from and kind of do some of those? And they're not going to be the biggest, but it gets him some reps. He's famous. He brings maybe some pizzazz to those games that they don't already have, and then he's waiting in the weeds. Is that a possibility? Do you think he would want to do that, or is that below a Drew Brees to step in and do like the third college football game?
Based on that quote you just gave, I think Drew Brees would think it's beneath him. I don't think it's beneath Drew Brees. I actually think that would be a really smart way to go about it. I mean, he's a college football legend. He held all the Big Ten passing records until, this explosion of offense the last few years, basically since Urban Meyer got to the Big Ten. I think it would make a lot of sense. It actually would have been a great fit at NBC, which holds the Big Ten's their secondary rights basically behind Fox. But It sounds like based on that comment, though, he wants to call NFL games. And so if he is going to pigeonhole himself as an NFL personality, I think that's really going to limit his options just because all of the top spots are taken. Even if let's say Tom Brady's one and done, like I've been predicting for months now, even if that were to come to fruition, like I would think Greg Olsen would just automatically get re-promoted back into that top spot. I don't know if Drew Brees leapfrog Greg Olsen. So it's interesting. I just went back and looked. Do you remember when Drew Brees' last NFL season was?
2019 or 2020?
It was 2020. That was further back than I would have anticipated. Like we're coming up on him getting enshrined in Canton here pretty soon.
That's true.
So I think that that would be interesting in and of itself, just because that will kind of reintroduce him, I think, to a lot of casual fans who haven't been keeping up with a lot of this. But I think that, so that means he was in the NBC booth in 2021. That kind of disastrous season, I guess. What's he been doing since?
I mean, I told you he started the YouTube channel.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess he was doing that for a bit. That was like last year. And then the last video was, it really only did it for like 6 months, and he did maybe once a week, one a week. So, I mean, that didn't take up his time. I don't know. I mean, maybe he's been kind of in the lab trying to get better at this stuff and just studying it. I mean, I don't really know. I think we've seen plenty of dudes who step in and are just good right away. I don't think just Tom Brady would tell you it's just pure time doesn't just make you better. I mean, Tom Brady, no one could shut up about all the prep he was doing, and that didn't seem to give him any sort of head start. I think you sort of either have it or you don't. But yeah, I think with Brees, like the place that I kind of went is the worst. This is what I thought. I want to throw it off of you. I don't know if it's true or not, because maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. I think Dan Orlovsky's a loser of ESPN welcoming him in here.
Yep.
I think Robert Griffin getting laid off and Orlovsky continuing to call those number 2 games and being very front and center at ESPN, even if Brees is just kind of a sub-in or a part-timer on Monday Night Countdown, maybe makes some appearances on NFL Today or NFL Live, or whatever the case may be in the next 18 months or so, he's coming for Orlovsky's turf a little bit. Even if it's not at ESPN, there's a new guy in the mix along with Olsen, who you mentioned, that is going to be on executives' minds as any of these positions become open.
It's funny you mentioned that, because just as we were talking about, the possibilities and the possible landing spots, my mind did kind of drift to, we're seeing it seems like half the weeks this year in the NFL schedule have Monday Night Football doubleheaders. And I know it's not that much. It's probably been, 4 or 5, if that. It's been at least 3 though, which is a increase from previous seasons. And so I think with stuff like that, you can kind of do the math. If they're experimenting with it more and more, it's probably only a matter of time until we have regular Monday Night Football doubleheaders on a more consistent basis. And if that's the case, then that opens up a new booth. And that does seem like a natural landing spot for somebody like Drew Brees. He obviously has way more name recognition than Dan Orlovsky. Dan Orlovsky's much better on camera at this point in his career, but I think you go inside the mind of an NFL executive, or I should say an ESPN executive. I'm guessing they're approaching it more like I approached our NFL media draft, where I take Tom Brady with the first pick. Then they're going to approach it like, hey, we really want to get rave reviews from Awful Announcing because Dan Orlovsky's doing great work in the booth. And so I do think the fact that it is ESPN, I don't think they're just bringing in Drew Brees to test run him because they happen to be in California. I do think that probably does say a lot, that they see an opening that they probably already have in mind. And I do wonder if that second Monday Night Football booth, if that becomes a more consistent thing, if that's what they're kind of targeting him for.
Yeah, because they have to know this is what he wants. His reps know this is what he wants. I mean, it's nice that they're bringing him into the mix, but when you see Andrew Marchand say that they've been thinking about this for a while, again, I just have a hard time believing that's for some kind of Jason Kelsey gig where he's doing, the pregame show and he's going to have a late night show next year. So like that's not why you bring Drew Brees in. So I don't know. I guess it gets us a little bit into what we're going to talk about with Chris, but maybe just since we are having him here and that's kind of the topic of the show is the college football stuff. Like we haven't necessarily historically seen that star power drive executives' decisions in college football broadcasting. And obviously Kirk Herbstreit's not going anywhere, but I don't know, like if you're Drew Brees and you kind of have you're diving back in, you reset things, you have your pick of all these jobs, the college football playoffs expanding, the big game-ness of what you're going to be able to do calling college football is growing. Do you think that might start to be more desirable for people than like for, I don't know, Greg Olsen or somebody like that? It was just, of course I want to go to the NFL. Dan Orlovsky stopped doing the college football thing almost immediately once the NFL became an option. Louis Riddick is, I'll call the second Monday night game over doing too much of that. Do you think we could see that get more intriguing and enticing to big announcers because of all the growth of college football?
I think we should. And I think just the fact that all of the top slots, again, for the NFL jobs are spoken for at this point. And so if you're Drew Brees and you have ties to the Big Ten, like you could replace Joel Klatt as Fox's #1 analyst. I would think, maybe Fox really, really likes Joel Klatt and Gus Johnson together. But if I'm Drew Brees, like, yeah, go call Big Ten games. Go. I mean, these games are doing monster ratings. And if you get, rave reviews or whatever, that's what catapulted Kirk Herbstreit. I mean, Kirk Herbstreit, based on his playing resume, has no business calling NFL games. I don't know if he ever was signed to a training camp roster after, a pretty average college career at Ohio State. Like Kirk Herbstreit got to this position based on the quality of his work, not his, pure name value, at least at the start. That obviously came with it. If you're Drew Brees, you already have that name recognition. Go out there, build up your resume, get in some spotlight games that you might not get on the NFL stage because you're not going to be able to get one of those top tier jobs, at least in the next, barring what happens with Tom Brady, at least in the next 5 years. So, yeah, I mean, that's the thing is if he's dead set on calling games, he's going to have to consider alternatives, whether it's being in a secondary booth or whether it's calling college games, because there's just not that option for him right now in terms of being in a top NFL broadcast booth, unless there's something happening behind the scenes that we are totally not privy to right now.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts on Brees? Is he set to vault above Greg Olsen and all these other guys as the next big thing, or we still need some time here? We haven't literally not seen him call a game, but we're getting hyped anyway.
I'm like surprised he wants to do it. I just think the first run went so poorly that I don't know if it's something where like he feels like he has something to prove and it's just like that athlete mentality, but like the whole thing with that run was kind of a lack of enthusiasm, right? Like it just didn't seem like he was super into it. So I guess I'm surprised now, 3 years, 4 years later, that he like suddenly has this itch to get back in the booth. I think that's what stands out to me.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, like I mentioned Brady and Manning for a reason, right? Like I think that the two of those guys are obviously, in terms of the generation that Brees dominated in, they were his counterparts. So he has that in common with them. But I think you just can kind of see what like the good and bad of like the robot QB brain can kind of be, right? Where with Brady, it's like I think it's so second nature to him and so just execution machine, whatever, that I think he just gets lost in the flow of a game. Whereas with Manning, it's like he's so fixated on that stuff. He's so over the top with the details and the situational awareness and the play-by-play execution that it's almost like it's infectious. Like you're watching him and you're nerding out about a big 2nd and 4. You know what I mean? Like because he's just so into it. Brees has to kind of get closer to the Manning side of it, which is why I mentioned I think it feels like he is getting another taste of him on this broadcast for a couple hours. But if he gets back on the mic of a real game and it's closer to Brady, then there might just be no coming back from that. I mean, we both are on the same page that Brady feels a long way away. I don't see how Brees gets out of it.
It does kind of seem interesting that if he were to do this, you would have Drew Brees, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Eli Manning. You'd have like basically all of the top quarterbacks except for Ben Roethlisberger from this.
And Phillip Rivers, who people wanted, when he retired, and he just kind of turned it down. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like he's just going to like coach high school football or something, but but I guess looking back, like, I mean, we have Troy Aikman, Steve Young used to call games.
Montana tried it.
I'm probably Dan Marino. Did Dan Marino have a regular media role at any
before
point?
my time to be able to know if he ever tried, but I don't recollect that he did, and I don't believe John Elway did either, right? He just went straight into entrepreneurship, and Dan Marino did studio. There we go.
Yeah, that's right, for CBS.
Our wonderful producer Phil. Yeah,
that's right.
I
mean, maybe that's just maybe I shouldn't be surprised. Maybe that's just the natural evolution of a quarterback is you retire and you get into media because that's what everybody expects of you.
And Romo just cut the line basically. So
yeah,
he just skipped over all this generation and said, "Oh, I'm pretty famous. I'll go ahead and take, 15, 20 million from CBS and beat all these guys to the punch. But yeah, it is what happens. Brees was bound to come back, I think, judging from his own comments along the way and, the celebrity appeal of having a guy like him in your booth. But we'll see if he does call a game over the next year or so. Until then, I think it's probably a lock he is back on Monday Night Countdown at some point this season, judging from the praise for this appearance. All right, next up, Chris Vannini of The Athletic walks us through his college football TV survey, part 2, second annual, diving into College Game Day, Pat McAfee, the broadcast booths, the networks, and covering the sport in general this year. We'll have him next.
Joining us now, a special guest. He is a senior writer at The Athletic, a guy I've known for years now. We hung out before WrestleMania. What was that? 34 in New Orleans, fellow wrestling fan, but you probably know him for his work covering college football at The Athletic. He also co-hosts their Until Saturday podcast. Chris Vannini. Chris, thanks for joining us, man.
Yeah, man. Good to be here. Good to talk with you.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest thing we wanted to talk to you about was the annual college football viewer survey that you do. It obviously generated quite a few headlines last year with the little shout out you guys got from Pat McAfee based on his approval rating. Just to go back to that. So Pat McAfee's approval rating last year on College Game Day, according to those you surveyed, was at 30.1%. So not very high. And then this year, though, it climbed to 37.7%. So it seems like the tides are starting to shift when it comes to the perception of Pat McAfee on game day. What say you?
I think so. I think people are really warming up to him. I think doing different things on the show, like the kicking segment, even the people who don't like him seem to like the kicking segment that they do and the money to students or charity or what have you. But yeah, I this isn't a scientific survey. We're not paying a pollster to do one of the kind. We're just surveying our readers. We got about 3,100 responses, 3,700 this year. And the people who like McAfee on game day went up and the people who don't like him went down. So it's basically an even split at this point, along with the people who just kind of selected no opinion. And he got very upset about it last year. That was also at a time when there was a lot of backlash toward him for things he said about Washington State and just a few other things that had been going on around game day. And so, he openly spoke about being unsure if he was going to return to game day and kind of waited on that for a while. He ultimately did, which I think we all expected him to. And look, the show's got record ratings for the last 2 years, and it's probably going to do so again. I think it's pretty clear it's working. There's just, as with everything with McAfee, some people really like him and some people really don't. And you kind of live with that. Personally, I mostly like him on the show.
Was that like wild to you when he responded to the survey last year? Because I think, we all write things and especially at Awful Announcing, we'll write things and people will respond. And there's always kind of that like quick, trigger in your gut or whatever, like, oh my God, like this really got to this person. And for Pat, it was like, I don't know if I want to continue doing game day based on the results of this survey, it seemed like.
Yeah, I think what I've learned and a lot of us have learned from him is that he does read a lot of stuff on social media. He reads a lot of stuff that is written about him. I know he's called you guys out many times over things that you guys pull from the show. So he is very sensitive to that, I think. And I do think the backlash on the College Game Day stuff was maybe bigger than other forums because it's an institution, because it's been there for so long, because we know college football fans can be very upset if you slight them in any which way, if you don't appreciate a certain tradition, which is what happened. So yeah, I was surprised that he would say that. Like I said, the show was doing well. He seemed to be having fun. I never thought he wouldn't come back. Did he use that for leverage or something? I don't know, but he didn't really announce it until I think the summer, is when he kind of fully signed that he was going to come back. So, yeah, that was surprised. I don't think he's mentioned anything about it this year, about the numbers going up. I did get a like on Blue Sky from his account of the survey. So someone has at least seen it, I guess.
Wow. Pat's one of the people leaving Twitter. Who would have thought?
I don't know whether him or whoever runs the account or something like that. Yeah.
For sure. Boston Connor.
Yeah, probably. I would be curious, Chris, and actually Ben too, like, what do you feel like Pat how has he gotten better on the show? Like, what do you feel like he gets about that show's audience and just why do we think that this is working better? Not just him maybe being less sensitive to the results or anything, but yes, the kicking segment, sure. But I feel like he seems to be more in tune with this audience than he was last year. There's not quite that give and take that there was week by week in year one.
I think it's pretty clear. One of the things he loves doing is the local chants of whatever that school is, the fight song, a song, whatever. He's great in front of a crowd, in front of a live crowd. But personally, like I've watched him on WWE and Game Day and a lot of these other things. I think the thing that he does that I don't like the most or like the least is his actual daily show when they're just kind of in the studio there. When you get him out in front of a crowd, he's fantastic. He knows how to feed off a crowd, how to lean into a crowd. James Madison last year, I think, with the basketball shot. He was at West Virginia this year. Like, whenever he goes to these college towns, he knows how to get people like excited and get the energy up. And that show needed energy. Like, it really had been lacking for a while. And he's brought up the energy of everybody. I mean, Ben, you know this. Michael Cole at WWE has said Pat McAfee kind of reinvigorated his own career, calling games with him. I think the same is true for Kirk Herbstreit. I think ever since McAfee got there, Herbstreit's energy is up and they feed off each other well, and it's really worked. So that's why I think he's been a real positive for the show. And I think he knows to kind of lean into the individuality of a place and give the fans what they want as opposed to complaining about the flag or something like that.
Yeah, I know that one of our clips that went the most viral or got the most views, however you want to frame it, is a clip from last year where he just started "We don't give a damn about the whole state of Michigan" chant while in Columbus. And it's just like it was very WWE. It felt like a WWE performer, which Pat ultimately is. And I think you make a good point about Herbstreit and the chemistry there. I also think the addition of Nick Saban has given you a real kind of yin and yang when it comes to, you have this kind of straight-laced guy in his 70s, and then you have this 37-year-old man-child. I say that lovingly. And it's but they also have admiration for each other and respect for each other. And I think it's helped kind of ease Nick into the game day experience. And he seemed, I mean, based on your poll, he had, I think, an 80% approval rating.
Yeah, like 79, 80% people are liking Nick Saban, which is not a surprise. I think everybody really seems to like it.
Yeah, but I mean, he's taken to this game day experience as quickly as anyone I can recall. And I do think that the chemistry with Pat has played a role in that to some degree. I think
I wanted to chime in on Saban. So
yeah,
to me, not a surprise. Genius, legend, name recognition, 105%, of course. Like, a lot of reasons that it made the utmost sense when they hired him are all kind of coming true. But like, when I hear Chris talk about the energy of the show, he could have sucked it backward, right? Like, this is a guy, if you watch the thing that I think established the chemistry between Pat and Nick was these paid, as we found out, appearances last year where Saban would just be kind of in his basement. Those were not lively. Those would not have indicated to you that Nick Saban was about to come on College Game Day and kind of, in a way, the best way that a dude his age can and his temperament can, like, match Pat's energy in some of these segments. It's actually like, I wonder what the world looks like where Pat, maybe because of, I mean this as a joke, because of Chris's survey, quits Game Day last year and doesn't do this, and they hire Saban anyway. That probably doesn't work. Like, I think we're looking at a world where it's, I don't know, 50% support for Saban. It's just, if you're an Alabama fan or you just are an old dude who likes to hear his thoughts on the game, you like him, but maybe the younger crowd hates it or something. Like, those two together feels like they've really struck gold to take them into kind of the next generation, or the next.
And he's gotten better, and he's gotten better week to week. I think it's the same thing you're seeing with Belichick. Like, these coaches who were just in their silos for decades, and they get out of it. And at first they're a little unsure because it's new territory. But when you're on that set week after week after week, and you've got McAfee next to you, I'm sure he can't help but let loose a little bit. They're bringing his wife on the show to be one of the guest pickers and doing a lot of stuff. And so a lot of these coaches, you just kind of weren't familiar with this world. It took a little bit to adjust. And I think Saban's really opened up. Yeah, because of McAfee. If he wasn't there, I don't know. Like, is Desmond Howard the guy who brings the energy then at that time? It would have been an interesting dynamic. It is a very crowded set, but I think everybody likes the McAfee Saban dynamic. Like, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it's interesting, like, we're so used to Nick Saban dominating. Now we seem to get like a daily dose of humility with him, whether it's Miss Terry outpicking him when it comes to her game day picks, or Livy Dunn shading him over his comments about Vanderbilt. Like, I there's just a lot of fun dynamics there that paint Nick Saban in a light that we haven't previously seen. I wanted to go though. If Pat McAfee was like the big headline from last year's survey, he's probably his rise is probably the big headline from this year's survey too. But I think the other, maybe the subhead, would be Big Noon and Big Noon Kickoff. And looking at the comparison year over year, just based on your survey, last year Big Noon Kickoff. Well, you ask readers, do you watch College Game Day or Big Noon Kickoff? Last year it was 77% Game Day, 23% Big Noon Kickoff. This year, 84.7% Game Day, 15.3% Big Noon Kickoff. I think we're seeing a lot of negative headlines, even on our site, about Big Noon Kickoff, and a lot of the fans' reactions to them kind of having a monopoly on Ohio State games, or taking the whiteout possibility away from Ohio State versus Penn State a few weeks ago. I think just kind of a general, I don't know, it almost seems like a dissatisfaction. What do you make of kind of the state of Big Noon Kickoff at this point in its tenure?
Yeah, so this is the third year I did the survey. The numbers this year are about what they were 2 years ago, so it kind of dipped and then went back. So the thing, I think the big picture thing with Big Noon Kickoff is it's presented as another kind of College Game Day, but it's really not. It's really a promotional vehicle for your Big 10 or your Big 12 games. Like, that's where they're going. As opposed to College Game Day, which doesn't have the Big 10. They've done a lot of Big 10 games this year. They went to Indiana. That was a Big 10 network game. In College Game Day was there. And so college, we wondered when Big 10 went away from College Game Day, would ESPN focus on the Big 10 less or not? And clearly that has not happened, at least especially with the College Game Day side of things. With Fox and Big Noon, when the college football playoff was going through its media rights negotiations over the last couple of years, Kevin Warren, the former Big Ten commissioner, was a big proponent of, let's get multiple networks in here. Let's have them bid against each other, do it like the NFL, and that will drive the price up. It will create just better things for everybody. And there was a lot of people who agreed with them on that. But ultimately, the playoff didn't get the bids I think it expected from a lot of those other parties. And it ends up re-upping with ESPN for 2026 and beyond. It's going to remain just on ESPN. And I always think back to the Big Ten championship game a couple years ago when Alabama was jockeying to get in the field, and Fox had Nick Saban on at halftime, I believe, of that Big Ten championship game. And that was so interesting to me. And I thought of that moment, hey, this is Fox getting ready to broadcast the playoff, and they're going to be more than the Big Ten, Pac-12, Big 12 type of thing. Maybe they are going to try to go national, truly national with everything. And they ultimately didn't. They didn't get the playoff, and Big Noon is not going to games that are not Big 10, Big 12 games. So I think it's just kind of is what it is at this point. And the ratings can be up and down and whatever. The larger conversation of games at noon, which is what Penn State and Ohio State fans have been dealing with, that's a whole separate issue. But in terms of the show itself, I think at this point, everybody kind of knows it's a promotional vehicle for one of these conferences, and that's okay. That's the role of the show.
Yeah, I've got a comparison for you. There was a few years ago where, probably 2019, 2020, WWE's creative was in the toilet, right? And they left this opening, this void in the wrestling industry for fans who wanted a better product. And along comes AEW, and it seemed like there was a real opening there for AEW. Lo and behold, WWE gets back on track for a variety of reasons. And instead of looking at AEW as competition to WWE, I think now it's kind of cemented as a viable alternative. And I think it's kind of the same for Big Noon, where you mentioned, Game Day was lacking energy. And I think there was a general dissatisfaction for the College Game Day experience. And they hadn't really figured out, the Corso thing, and McAfee was maybe there, but not quite working yet. And then all it took was Game Day to get back on track. And now, and it seemed like there was an opening for Big Noon, right? It seemed like, hey, we kind of like Urban Meyer on TV. This show has a different energy. It's a little more fun, a little livelier. now that College Game Day's gotten back on track, I think you're right. Like, we kind of have to just change the paradigm in which we view Big Noon, because Big Noon isn't going to replace College Game Day. It's just an alternative to it. What do you think about that?
I think the biggest, it's higher than SEC Nation, the SEC Network show, but it's not College Game Day at this point. It's in between the two. It's the bigger production, but it's also more. It's only going to go to the games where it has the rights.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you're going to Ohio State Marshall in September, like, you're kind of giving the game away at that point, right?
There was a stretch last year where it was the Big Noon was like at Michigan, like 5 straight weeks or 5 out of 6.
Yeah.
It was Colorado games, the first like 3 out of 4. There's not a lot of variety in the location. And I think when you go to the same place over and over, it just devalues the show to the viewers. Like, we want to see you guys at new places and new scenes. If it's the same thing every time, it's not as interesting as a television product.
Right. I mean, we know that game day is going to be at the biggest game each week. And I think to this point in the season, there's only been 2 games where they've been at the same place. And it was Michigan, Texas, and Ohio State, Penn State.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about a different thing and get both of your guys' takes on it, which is something that's been getting chatter for sure across the landscape and was kind of homed in on in the survey, which is ESPN taking over the SEC. There was a quote, I think, from one of the respondents in the article. ESPN just doesn't have as high quality of a production. CBS was so narrowly focused on the SEC that everything, the analysis, background info, even the camera shots were all top notch. I hate that they didn't renew. Were you surprised to see that level of pushback, Chris? And I guess how much of it do you think is the fact that it's just a new thing and people are still getting used to it? And maybe next year we're talking about, and this year ESPN's broadcast of the SEC is one of the big risers in this whole thing, just because people come to expect it.
I think the thing was the SEC on CBS was so much its own thing. It was the only real game CBS was doing. It was always a big game because it's the SEC. When you and they put the effort into that, you had Vern Lundquist. There was an aura to that. You move over to ABC, ESPN, and it's kind of like every other game. Now they do have their own special graphics package, and ESPN, ABC have tried to make it feel different than everything else on ESPN. There's the graphics package, they got the logo, they've got the song that they brought back. So like they've tried, but the problem is ESPN has every SEC game. And so ultimately it kind of, I think gets a little, I don't think the SEC on ABC 330 feels like a special thing at this point, because you might have a bigger SEC game at night also on the ESPN networks. That's the game that gets Chris Fowler or something like that. So I think it's more just the nature of it being all in the same place. There was nothing like the SEC on CBS for good reason. It was a very good deal for CBS, and the SEC realized they eventually needed to do something more. So I think that's what's lost. It's not consistent. It doesn't feel like the thing to watch every week. I think that's the biggest thing.
I feel like that kind of plagues ESPN in a lot of places. I mean, I know we're talking college football right now, but I think that's what people are going to miss about the NBA on TNT, where it's like, this is separate. This is special. When I tune in, it feels like this. It sounds like this. It looks like this. I mean, even like you could point to like Round Ball Rock in the NBA world being this treasured nostalgic thing where it's like the NBA on NBC just had a brand and it had an emotional kind of connection that I think maybe is similar with the CBS stuff, where now it's just one of the 15 games you might be able to tune in on ESPN on a Saturday. And it was always going to be hard to, I think, make it feel different, no matter how many, different creative people and production staff they put on it and hire a new, lead producer or whatever. It's just like, it's on ESPN, the same as everything else. So yeah, that's tough. That's interesting. What do you think, Ben?
I think, I can speak from the Ohio State Big Ten perspective. I think that's what we're seeing with a lot of the complaints about them just being on Big Noon every week, is like, you want that variety. And it's like the Big Ten has a CBS package, and it's cool that we get Brad Nessler and Gary Danielson calling games. And you would think, like, if you're Ohio State, you'd like to be in some of those games. You'd like to experience that. You'd like to be on the NBC night game more than once a year. And so I think that's what you're seeing is kind of that, that monotony that you're, okay, we're used to Gus Johnson. We're used to Joel Klatt. We want more. We want different. And if you're an Ohio State fan, you're hitting a stretch here where 5 of your last 6 games are going to be big noon games, and the other game's going to be at noon too, just on the Big Ten Network. So I definitely think there's something to that, and wanting that variety out of your broadcasts.
Ben, when this was Spiro Didi's on CBS, you loved it. You love your Browns getting the same announcers every week. Come on, you can't pick and choose. You got to just learn to love it.
My Cleveland Browns fandom is very separate from any other fandom in my life.
Got it. We'll dig into your heart and soul a different time, but
Yeah.
I did just notice the contradiction there. You love Spiro, you're not down with the big noon stuff. Come on.
I got you. Chris, I want to talk to you a little bit about your career, because I've been following you for as long as I can remember. And what was the site you were at? Football Scoop initially?
coachingsearch.com, which is kind of like a
That-
rival run by the brother of it. That's where I was when we met at WrestleMania. And that's where I know you and I have known each other online for a long time. We've just kind of seen each other go different places. I know you used to live with Ari Wasserman, who's now my buddy in Dallas. And so it's a lot of sharing across the board here. But yeah, I was at Coaching Search from 2012 to 2017. That was a job, a couple years out of college I got. Just an independent site. Started out as a part-time job, became a full-time job, ran it myself for 2 years. And then The Athletic came around in 2017, and Stuart Mandel was a big fan of the site and hired me in to kind of do some of that and some other stuff. And so that's how I got here, doing that independent site it was that mid 2010s where there's a lot of websites that are just not around anymore. So it is a tougher field for people for that reason, but that's what kept me afloat. I applied for jobs, all kinds of places, SB Nation, ESPN, Beat Jobs, what have you. Couldn't get one until The Athletic came aboard, and I was just doing something different that somebody liked, and that person had the power to hire people, and that's what it takes. Those are the breaks you need in this business for sure.
Well, that's what I was going to say, is your coverage stood out because it was different, and you were breaking news, and you had value in the information you were providing. You weren't just transcribing press conferences and plugging in quotes here and there. Like, you were breaking news. What was that like? I mean, at that point, you're in your early to mid 20s, and you're breaking some pretty major stories.
Yeah, so it was a site focused on coaching news and coaching philosophies. Like, the primary audience was coaches, but also regular people as well. And that was at a time when nobody else was really, just Coaching Search and Football Scoop, who were doing daily updates of the coaching ticker, essentially. Like, here are the coaches who changed jobs, and following all those little things from all sorts of levels. And nowadays, a lot of people do that. A lot of people have their own running updates for all this type of stuff, but it was new at the time. It was different. And so, like, that's always the advice I give to young writers, young journalists, or whatever. Like, how do I get started? It's you got to do something that nobody else or very few people are doing. It's the only way to get noticed in today's world, because there's so many things out there. Everybody's trying to get attention. You're fighting for that stuff. What are you doing that's different than everybody else? And so even when I was doing Coaching Search, I was not getting jobs at all these other places. I was meeting coaches and getting to know coaches and going to the coaches convention and creating a Rolodex of sources, to which I told myself, like, hey, I'm not making a lot of money here. And I'm working 24/7, missing holidays and all kinds of stuff. But I've got something that will help me at the next job, whatever that is. And I almost got out of the business. I mean, spring 2017 is when everybody got laid off from the websites. That was when Fox pivoted to video. ESPN laid off a bunch of college writers. And so at that point, I was thinking, like, what even is my future? When Bruce Feldman is getting laid off of a writing job at Fox, like, what am I going to do? And I told myself I'd give myself one more year to kind of figure it out, and I may get out of the business. And so I'd reached out to Stuart Mandel, who I had talked to before. Again, he was a fan of the site. And I just said, hey, just want to know if you have any career advice, given everything. He says, I'm going on vacation. I'll reach out in a couple weeks when I get back. So a couple weeks, he calls me. He goes, hey, I know you wanted some advice, but I might have a job for you. The Athletic is starting up, and they want to hire a lot of these college people who had just been laid off from all these places. Like, that was really the genesis of The Athletic. It was it was a handful of local team sites. But when all those writers got laid off, the Athletic realized it could come scoop in and go national at a time it didn't know it could. And so Stewart brought me in. It was me, Nicole Auerbach, Max Olson, Matt Fortuna, Chantel Jennings, and Jason Kersey, along with Stu. We were the writers on the college football site. And when I started the Athletic, I was doing Group of Five coverage. And again, that was something nobody else was doing. And so I was continuing to do stories and things that stood out, things that nobody else was doing. And that's what I've always tried to do with my job, because there's no other way to survive in this. Like, anybody can do the same type of thing. What are you doing that's different? It's the only way you can get attention. So that's my long-winded way of explaining how I got to where I am, but also the advice I kind of give to people. And what is always a very tough business. You got to get lucky. Everybody who's made it anywhere has gotten lucky. And I was one of those people who got lucky.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing I will say about your coverage is, I mean, there are a ton of national college football writers, right? Like even at the Athletic alone, but yours has always stood out to me because it's different. It's unique. It has a different perspective. And even stuff like the ranking all 134 Division I teams. It's like, I don't know of many other sites doing that. It's definitely different and unique. So that's something I've always admired about your work.
Appreciate that.
I want to jump in, actually. Is there, I guess, kind of two prongs if you pick one that you want to do, but is there somebody or some outlet or some show that you feel like is kind of deserves some more shine for doing something that others aren't in this space, Chris? Or if you were to point out an area that you think is, I mean, maybe this is something that you'll just fill yourself, but that is maybe undercovered in this. But like, I think of On3 with NIL, right? Like, I associate their rise with NIL directly. They became the go-to, right? We kind of see these things pop up. What is that right now? Or what should it be right now? What's not getting enough shine? Kind of whatever you see in the landscape.
Well, I can take both questions. I think some people who have done a really good job of finding a niche and carving that out is the guys at Split Zone Duo, Richard Johnson, Stephen Godfrey, Alex Kirshner. They always have really good get to the point podcasts. I listen to the show. I subscribe to their Substack. They also get into some new stuff. They'll do coaching rumors and various things that they're hearing and stuff like that. It's a very good job they've done a really good job of creating a community. I went to their live show at the national championship game last year. And it's what I've wanted us to try to do at the Athletic, is what I've told our people. Like, we need to kind of, in this, coming off of the election, in this age of new media, like who is your community? Who are you building off of that? I think they've done a really good job of carving that out. And in terms of different spaces, Ross Dellinger has done a really good job at Yahoo. He's a competitor, but he's done a good job of the NCAA beat, which is house settlements, lawsuits. Like, there's a lot of stuff. Like, we've all covered the NCAA for a very long time. I do think he's pushed the conversation more than other people have done before in various topics. Sometimes they're big deals, sometimes they're not as big a deals, but it's got people in the industry talking, and that's why he's had the success that he's had, is kind of really focusing on that governance beat, which for a long time was very, very boring. But now you've got settlements, you've got Congress involved, you've got bigger changes to college sports in the last couple of years. And he's someone who really went at that topic from the beginning.
Yeah. Ross is one of my go-tos when I need to try to understand something that there's no way I would be able to understand on my own when it comes to this NCAA stuff. All right. I've praised you enough, Chris. I've got a hard-hitting question here, though, for you. How much money did you steal from the Athletic this summer playing college football 25 and trying to pass it off as work?
So I was going to get the game no matter what. And early, like a year, when the game announced it was coming back, I was like, I want that to be my beat. I want to jump on that. I'm someone who played the game as a bunch as a kid. So I want to be the person who writes these types of stories. And so, we had, there were some people, some writers who got early looks at the game, gave some feedback. Ari Wasserman's talked about it, so just to help the game out. I didn't want to do that because I was like, no, I can't do this. I can't sign NDAs. I want to report on the game. And so, The Athletic flew me out there in the spring for the EA Sports show, and they invited a bunch of reporters to come kind of check everything out for the first time. So that counts as a paid trip. And then I figured I'd be getting a copy of the game to review, but I needed a console, and I didn't want to spend $500 on a PS5. I have not a big gamer anymore. I've still got my old PS2 and my Xbox 360 in my living room. Like during the pandemic, I bought MVP Baseball 2005 and started playing that game again. But the newer stuff I'm not as up on. So I didn't know if the Athletic was going to let me expense it or not. I didn't want to spend $500. I found an Xbox Series S, the digital only cheaper version of the Xbox on Facebook Marketplace for $200. It usually retails for $300, but I got it for $200. Totally great. And the Athletic let me expense that. So I did get to expense the $200 console on that for the review, which did bonkers numbers. Like, so when I went to EA Sports in the spring, the plan was to just write one story about the game. I come out of that presentation we all saw, and I called my editor and I was like, this has to be more than one story. Like I tweeted like a picture of myself at the studio of like, hey, gonna have something coming soon. Did 1 million views on Twitter, just that tweet. Yeah. And so I was like, I told the Athletic and the New York Times people, like, there's a gaming audience here, people who do not read the Athletic, but will read it for this game and what I think of the game and what's in the game. And we need to write as many things as we can on this. So I think I did 4 stories coming out of that trip. Like gameplay impressions, what they told us about Dynasty mode, how NIL works, and I think something else. So then once they weren't sure, and I was like, I promise this is going to do well. It did. Crazy numbers on all that stuff. Ton of people come to the Athletic who weren't normally reading it, and they're like, okay, do as much as you can on the game now. Like let's talk about pasta. Let's talk to Pat White about what it was like being a cheat code in the game back in 2007. Like, because those video game stuff was doing crazy numbers. People really wanted to know every little piece they could about the game. I got questions from so many people I had never even thought of. People are asking me like, hey, can you edit players like socks? Can you change the pads for like, I never thought to ask that when I was there at EA Sports. So like I've learned a lot through the people who have come and asked me questions and stuff I've learned about the game. And so it'll be interesting year 2 when it's not a new game, how that goes. But the video game audience is gigantic. There's a lot of people who go crazy over college football 25 who don't watch college football. Like it's just not part of their thing. And so that's a new audience that I think we tried to tap into really well. And we're going to, I think, keep trying to do that.
Yeah, it's crazy.
I don't know if Ben has any more, but I have one other off the beaten path one here for you, Chris. Maybe we can wrap here. But you also wrote an oral history of Playmakers.
The favorite story I've ever done.
The
very is it really?
Lived.
It really is. It was so. It didn't even feel like work.
Well, I'm glad I get to ask you about it then. It's a little bit of a silly question, but please take it in whatever direction you want. But I have a regret issue, whatever. We don't have good sports shows or movies anymore. Feels like that's just gone. They all disappeared. Maybe blame Ted Lasso, or I don't really know.
All American is there. I don't watch it. I hear it's crazy. I know a couple of people who watch that.
So maybe I'm wrong, but that's my view. And ESPN completely pivoted, not only canceling this show, but they basically didn't really do scripted shows much at all after this little experiment in the mid-2000s that you kind of chronicled in the piece. Is Playmakers to blame for all of the downturn of ESPN scripted programming, good sports movies? Is this patient zero for why we're in this complete crap hole of good sports stuff now?
I think that's part of it, although I wouldn't necessarily blame ESPN. Might be more on the NFL. So this story, I had just like literally, it was like early that year. It's like trying to figure out, I was like, what's a good off season? I tried to do fun stories. Like what's something off the beaten path to do? And I had my Playmakers DVD just like sitting on the front of my TV box. And I was like, well, that was a good show. Oh, 2003, I think it was, or 4. Oh, this is 20 years. This will be a perfect time to do it. And so I start trying to find these actors and their managers. And I got to say, if you're a reporter who wants to find somebody in Hollywood, sign up for a free trial of IMDb Pro, because they list the contact info for everybody's managers and their agents in there. And so I reached out to all these people's managers. Hey, I'm doing a story about Playmakers. Would love to talk to everybody in the show. And pretty much everybody was gung-ho about it. One or two of them, I think, were in the middle of shooting something, so it took a few months. That story took about like 6-7 months to get everything together, but everybody loved talking about it. And Mark Shapiro, who was head of ESPN content at the time, was happy to talk about it in a way I didn't expect. Like he was very open. He's like, look, so to get to your question, at that time, ESPN wanted to get out of just relying on what they called stick and ball. They're paying all this money to rent content. What can they do that they can own themselves? And scripted content
Very relevant
was part
now.
yeah, scripted content was part of that. There was the Junction Boys documentary. There was Season on the Brink, the Dale Earnhardt the Dale Earnhardt dramatization. And a lot of those same people are who did Playmakers. And Playmakers was crazy huge. Like Mark Shapiro, it's in the story, but Mark Shapiro was like, this is the only thing everybody was asking people at ESPN about. Like, what's next on the show? Like, if for people who don't remember how big that show was, it was out of this world. It was bigger than any of them expected it to be. And they had told the NFL, like, hey, we're doing the show. It's pro football. The NFL said, yeah, it's okay. Just don't use, our logos and whatnot. And they didn't. But when it got so big, the hype up to it, they couldn't ignore it anymore. There's a anecdote about a preseason game where there's a commercial for the show and someone's doing drugs or something like that. Yeah. And I think Paul Tagliabue or somebody just calls up Bob Iger. It's like, what is this? And so at that point, they stopped advertising the show on NFL games. And so they kind of knew from the beginning, like, NFL may not be happy about this. And ultimately, it's a hit show that didn't get renewed. That never happens, like in Hollywood. And that's what Mark Shapiro said.
It was like 2+ million viewers an episode, right? Live.
Yeah. And the NFL didn't say cancel it. They didn't say take it off the air. They didn't say cut it. They were just like, look, what are you doing here? You're kind of making football not look great. And at this moment, ESPN is trying to get Monday Night Football from ABC because that negotiation is going on. And ultimately, Bob Iger and the people at the top of ABC Disney decide now we're cutting the show. And they got Monday Night Football a couple of years later after that. And everybody on the show was so disappointed. They had so many big plans. For a lot of them, it was their first big break or their only big break. It's still what they're known for. But ultimately, the NFL was powerful enough to persuade ESPN to not do it. And it's been that way ever since. Shapiro told me, it's at the end of the story. Shapiro said they wanted to do something about a story about a similar show about college sports gambling. Commissioners were not happy. They wanted to do an MLB thing about A-Rod. MLB wasn't happy. And Shapiro was like, at that point, I'm throwing up my hands being like, all right, what are we doing here? And so that's kind of when they got out of scripted content. And now they're heavily reliant on renting those sports rights, the exact thing they didn't want to be 20 years ago. And here's where we are. And I think Playmakers was a big reason for that.
That's wild. That's wild. All right, Chris, we'll get you out of here real quick. What do you want to plug? I know you got a million things. What do you want to plug here?
Just theathletic.com for all of our college football stuff. I'm also on the Until Saturday College Football Podcast. And if you're a pro wrestling person, the Getting Over Wrestling Podcast is something I do as well.
Yeah, that's a great show. I love the pre-shows you guys do for the pay-per-views and getting ready for Mania season here, peeking around the corner. So will I see you in Las Vegas?
If the Athletic sends me, they sent me to Philly last year for the first time to cover WrestleMania, and I think it went well, so we'll see.
Definitely. All right, Chris Vannini from The Athletic. Thanks for joining us, man.
Thanks, guys.
All right, let's go ahead and close out the show with our hot mics of the week, where Ben and I each bring something to the show that caught our eye, we nerded out about, we loved, we hated. Ben, kick us off here.
I'm going to go with a story that both you and I have covered at Awful Announcing, and it is the ongoing feud between Barstool Sports and country music star Zach Bryan. For the uninitiated, this entire thing started as the result of a Barstool personality, Brianna Chicken Fry. I learned recently her last name is not Chicken Fry, but she...
What a relief for her.
Yeah. She and Zach Bryan broke up. It was a very public breakup. Zach Bryan, I guess, blindsided her by joining the Raya dating app and posting a lengthy message to Instagram announcing their breakup, which she didn't expect. If you want to hear all the details about it, you can listen to the BFFs podcast that she co-hosts with Dave Portnoy, and I believe it's Josh Richards. This is a world I am not entirely, too connected to or familiar with. I talked to my wife about it, and she certainly knows more than I do. But I will say what you will about Dave Portnoy, the guy can make a diss track, and he has released 2 diss tracks aimed at Zach Bryan. One was Smallest Man, which wound up getting pulled due to according to Portnoy, a copyright claim from Warner Music Group because Josh Richards has, I guess, an exclusive recording deal with Warner that he forgot to mention before they recorded the song. And Warner also reps Zach Bryan. So I'm guessing they weren't too happy about it. And then the latest one that came out was Country Diddy, which you can kind of connect the dots there. But look, I don't really know if we're the right people to have takes on this. I don't know if we want to go into a normalization of Barstool conversation right now. All I will say is those tracks were good, and they were pretty good diss tracks when it comes to the diss track scene. That's my expert music opinion.
Sure. Maybe there was some studying up of the Kendrick Drake beef that Portnoy was a student of last year. I'm not too sure, but yeah, it's surprising. I didn't know that musicianship was one of the many skills that Dave Portnoy had. I mean, I knew the stock market, starting a sports media company, a podcast host. I guess we can add the musicianship there, but does not surprise me at all that if you put a test to Dave Portnoy, can you create a beef with somebody who is messing with your co-host? You could have told me he learned how to, juggle, tightrope walk, maybe do whatever Red Panda does at NBA halftimes. I think Dave Portnoy would have put his skills to the test and learned how to do it. So yeah, singing a song like that's low down the list of impressive feats. Dave's going to do what it takes to beef with whoever he needs to beef with. What's surprising of all of this is Lawrence Holmes from Chicago Sports Radio Bernstein from not Leonard Bernstein. What is the guy's name? That's the singer. From him over to Zach Bryan. That's the most surprising. If you're tracking the Dave Portnoy beefs, is the very jagged timeline between the people that he's fucking with more than anything else.
Yeah, Dan Bernstein,
co-host of Lawrence Holmes, ex-co-host of Lawrence Holmes, who Portnoy won a contest to go sit in on the radio show of for a couple $100 as he was messing with those guys. So yeah,
incredible.
If you
range.
put him to the test, he'll pass the test, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't have any gossip or tabloid takes here, Ben? Just the sports media angle?
Yeah, just the sports media angle,
Okay.
I guess. I don't. Zach Bryan doesn't come out of this looking great. I think that
no, $12 million to shut somebody up, not a great look.
Yeah, for just being your ex-girlfriend, that's a pretty. I'm not too familiar with NDAs. That seems pretty high. When it comes to an NDA.
Never been offered one. Wouldn't hate to be. If anyone wants to shut me up for a few $1 million, I'll probably say yes. I don't know.
DMs are open.
Nobody's done anything bad enough to me that I feel like I got to get it out there. So of the life I've lived, I feel like I'll take $1 million from pretty much anybody that I've come across, and I won't talk about them. Okay, my hot mic.
I real quick, I do feel like if you're a public facing personality, which Bree Chicken Fry is, signing an NDA would be the most anxiety filled thing in the world, because inevitably you're going to have to talk about something, and you're going to be wondering, is this what gets my NDA pulled and me sued or my money taken away?
That's what I wrote in my piece about it. Is I was like, it feels close to impossible for her to maintain her career and have an NDA about this. You would have to just be stubbornly quiet about the whole thing. She took time off of this BFFs podcast as all this was unraveling, and she's kind of been a little bit less engaged on the Barstool side as she's been dating him and on tour with him. So then to come back after the breakup and be like, sorry guys, nothing to see here. You almost couldn't have done it. So she would have had to sacrifice more than just, the storytelling if she was gonna take that thing. But okay, closing out here, an article that I wrote for Awful Announcing this past week about abolishing sports monologues, and I won't dig too deep on my take. People can read the piece. The long and short of it is a trend that I have noticed for several months, if not multiple years now, from hosts who often have guests like Bill Simmons or Ryan Russillo or Colin Cowherd on his podcast, or even like Zach Lowe on the NBA side, to people who have started or grown their podcasts as just solo enterprises like Skip Bayless and Nick Wright and Stephen A. Smith. Everybody just wants to talk to themselves for an hour on their podcast. Everybody wants to do a monologue. And to me, that's just the exact opposite of what a podcast is supposed to be. I understand people have done solo sports radio. I don't need a history lesson on that, obviously. I get it. But even now, the best podcasts remain a handful of interesting people where you just get to be a fly on the wall. They're either breaking down a topic that you're interested in, or they're just shooting the shit, hanging out, or they're, dissecting the news, or they're reacting to an event. I mean, there's all sorts of things. But the bottom line is people talking to each other about something you care about, and you get to listen. So where in there did the viewers, did the audience communicate to these people, hey, could you do it by yourself and actually double the length of the segment? I don't get it. I want it to end. What do you think?
I think as somebody who has done this in a past life, typically when I would have to do it, all the way back when I used to host an Ohio State podcast, it's because I didn't have a guest. I was in a jam and I needed to get a podcast out. And I was like, all right, I guess I'll wax poetic for 20 minutes about Ohio State's 2017 recruiting class. And we'll just put that out as content because I have to meet a quota. What I do get, I'm with you. And I cringe every time Bill Simmons says he's going to open up a 6-pack, which is just him bouncing from topic to topic. To fill a 45-minute
Which was
segment.
Once, I think, sponsored by Miller Lite, but no longer is. So he just kept the name. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe he's looking for another beer or soda sponsor there. But it defeats the purpose. And that's based on my experience. Although there are examples of like Stephen A. Smith, the Stephen A. Smith show is solo, right? That's just a solo show.
He was one of the people I just threw under the bus. Yep.
Yeah. And so for Bill, I understand it, at least to a degree, because I'm guessing either a guest fell through or something to that degree happened. For Stephen A. Smith, that's the premise of your show. And I guess I'm not a Stephen A. Smith hater. I actually have come to enjoy him on First Take since I started at this job. But the idea of just listening to Stephen A. Smith rant for 45 minutes a night, I don't know who that appeals to, other than the YouTube algorithm, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, look, to be fair to some of these people, I also did a solo podcast about the Phoenix Suns for 5.5 years by myself. I've done it. I understand. But neither you or I, our struggles to find a guest, I don't think these people are having that same issue, right? Come on. If Bill Simmons asks one of his employees to come on his podcast, I think he could probably make it happen. So
Nephew
this
Kyle
is definitely exactly, right? I think this is definitely by choice. So that's the part that I just don't get. Or Russillo, he'll have 2 guests later in the show, but he'll just open it with half an hour of himself giving you his top to bottom CFP rankings. It's just rope that into the thing you're about to do with Todd McShay anyway. It's just so odd that people seem to be more and more. And I get it, right? Russillo did solo radio. Stephen A. Smith did solo radio. I understand Colin Cowherd did solo radio. But it's just, it's a skill. It's impressive. It's whatever. There is a talent to it. Some of these people built up audiences and followings and fan bases doing exactly this. I just think you're never going to get to 100% of what a good podcast could be if it's just you. You might get to 90, and Ryan Russillo's 90 probably better than almost every other person's collection of voices doing a more traditional show, because he's good at this. But it's just, why shoot yourself in the foot? Make a better show. Bring a guest on.
it's also hard to do. So it's like you're giving yourself a higher degree of difficulty while putting out a worse product. I wonder, and I don't think this is what's happening, but I guess just throw it out there. Like if the TikTokization of media, like, because even when we clip out this show, it's a lot easier. I'm probably going to clip out a clip of you complaining about monologues that's going to sound like a monologue, because it's much easier for TikTok to pick up a single rant than it is to pick up you and I going back and forth on Big Noon Kickoff with Chris Vannini.
It could be. It very well could be. I'm sure that there are production reasons for this. I'm sure that there are all sorts of things that people could tell me and throw my way as a rebuttal. But I'll just point to the podcast charts, and for the most part, you look at the top, it's still people talking to each other. So I feel like that makes my point for me. All right, that'll wrap us up. My rant is over. Thank you for listening to the play-by-play. We're here for you every single Wednesday, so hit follow or subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening. Check out awfulannouncing.com. We've got content minute by minute covering this wild world of sports media. Thank you to Chris Vannini, and we'll see you next week.